In this episode, Roger Hancock of Recall Infolink explains why distributors found the most initial value in his product during the early days, how his product saves businesses money during a recall process, and how he's adding more value to his services in order to attract more manufacturers. I'm Ryan Vasso with the Venture College, a program in the College of Innovation and Design at Boise State University. The Venture College helps students and community members launch their ideas beyond the classroom and turn those ideas into startups, lifestyle businesses, side hustles, and other ventures. Almost every startup initially struggles to find product market fit, where their service or product matches exactly what customers want and need. That's why we've started the Value Prop series. We will be talking to successful entrepreneurs who will explain what their product or service does, which customer segments really need their product, and why they are a better fit than the existing competition. In seeing other companies explain their value proposition, we hope to help you find and build your own value proposition. If you are interested in learning more or need some help, contact us at venturecollege@boisestate.edu or go to our website to learn more. Also, watch out for our social media accounts for the next installments of the Value Prop series. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Roger Hancock, CEO and founder of Recall Infolink. Roger, tell us what your business does.
We transform the way product recalls are processed around the globe across multiple supply chains, making everyone's lives and jobs easier, faster, and happier.
And for those that aren't familiar with recalls, that's like when meat packaging goes bad for whatever reason, there's a reason to pull it off the shelves. Your software helps with that process, correct?
That process, nuclear power, valves that open and close cooling water inlets, seat belts that don't fasten correctly, you name it, we can recall it.
So if they don't have your product, let's just use a grocery store. Yeah, definitely you have other markets, but let's just use a grocery store. If somebody like Albertsons that has 1,000 locations needs to pull XYZ product without your stuff, what is the normal process?
It could be sending emails. It could be making chain telephone calls. So one person calls 4, and those 4 call 4 more, and those 4 more call. It's inefficient. It's unstandardized, and it's fraught with risk of error and taking too long.
So Roger's sharing that there's 3 downsides to not having a service like his. One is that companies just aren't as efficient, they're not standardized, and it's prone to human error. And so what we find a lot with startups is that they do have these problems, but the goal of a startup is to really find which problem is the biggest problem, because that's typically the ones that people are going to pay for most. And Roger will go into this and give a little bit more detail. Gotcha. And so if I understand the story right, then somebody in Albertsons hears there's a recall. Without your stuff, they would have to be emailing on the phone down to the individual store locations. Hopefully at some point they get confirmation that it was pulled and recalled, and then all that information would have to flow back up to the top.
Correct. And be compiled. And we still have a lot of clients today who used to do this by fax.
All right.
And some of them still do by fax, and our system manages that fax transaction, but it's a little bit still antiquated in some sectors.
Makes sense. Okay, so with a little bit more detail, how would yours work? So now I'm a grocery store. I have your software. Someone high up realizes there needs to be a recall. Then what?
The supplier, in the case of Albertsons, the supplier, they're self-distributing. So the supplier is Albertsons and the retailer is Albertsons.
Yeah.
But there's lots of models where the supplier is a different company. They would log in to our cloud-based system. They would enter data, what items need to be recalled, what needs to be done with the product, who did they sell it to, and they would push go. Once they push go, emails, phone calls, in some cases faxes, and also text messages. We're seeing more and more transition to a text message notification process in lots of sectors.
Yeah.
Go out and all the information's included. The receiving company can get all the information they need, take the action that they need to, and respond back with affected inventory to start the credit process on the business side, document all of this to protect their customers, protect their brand. It's all quite automated, both outbound and return.
So when it comes to business services, it almost always comes down to how much money you can save the client or how much additional revenue you can bring in for the client. And so Rogers is pretty obvious. He's going to help you save time, right? So instead of having to call everyone, his system does that automatically. So you're just saving in man hours of being able to track it, to track a recall. But also it's going to help with liability. So if they move quickly, there's less liability, right? That means a bad product is not on the shelves. And so you have less lawsuits or less problems. So that's going to help them save money in the long run. And then also he'll talk about an easier refund process. So he's going to make it easier for the middlemen to get their money back when there is a recall.
Gotcha. So I'm hearing a couple things. Not only are you helping with just the speed and communication of actually pulling the product, but it sounds like there's value there in almost having a paper trail in case there's some type of legal, ramification. There's a paper trail, automatic. And then it sounds like you help on the financial side. So if they're trying to get a refund, you have the proof and kind of the paperwork for that as well.
Both of those are entirely true. There's a big business component of what we do, and we actually help with the economics of recalls for everybody involved so that it's most efficient. There's a big compliance part of recalls, and our documentation it saves hours, countless hours and hours of work.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the kind of telephone tag process where if one person's calling 4 people and those people are calling 4 people, by the time you get to the end of the chain, the message may look nothing like what it was supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Then there's also a liability protection component. So compliance with regulatory requirements is one thing. Protecting your brand and your company from liability exposure is another. There's a big issue in the news right now because Bluebell had to recall some ice cream, and this actually, the time that it takes for things to work through the courts, this was like 4 or 5 years ago. But the CEO is being held liable and being tried for selling contaminated product, knowingly selling contaminated product and not recalling it expeditiously. So there's a big liability component that our system solves as well.
So let's take a pause because what Roger's talking about is the severity of pain. And so when it comes to liability issues, if your CEO is getting sued or if your company is being sued because you had a bad product out, the severity of pain is extremely high. It's up here. The problem he's facing is the frequency of that doesn't happen as much. Like the lawsuits specifically don't happen as much. We don't see CEOs in court, every week for a new problem. And so an entrepreneur like Roger has to balance finding what's painful enough that's also happening at a high frequency. And that's the match that typically will sell the most, the fastest. That's not to say people won't buy up here, but think of this as almost like life insurance. The severity of pain, if a spouse were to die when they're 25, is pretty high, and it would affect, especially if it's the income maker of the family. But the frequency, the chances of that happening is pretty low, which is why you see a lot of 20 or 30-year-olds not have life insurance because they're willing to risk it.
And so going back to the Bluebell example, you mentioned like suppliers using your stuff. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around if there was an ice cream company X has a bad product, is ice cream product X touching your software, or is it just the executives within a certain grocery store chain? Like how does that work?
We keep ice cream off of all of our software. We don't let it touch. Any point along the supply chain can pick up information, put it into our system, and use it for processing the recall to their own supply chain. So it doesn't have to start at Bluebell. If
Yeah.
it does start at Bluebell, it's most efficient. So our service has carried recall information from manufacturer to distributor to retailer to consumer
Yeah.
in 4 hours. And each node along the supply chain gets customized information so that they can take the right action. So the consumer doesn't see the B2B communication that to them would make no sense.
Yeah.
You know? So we speed up the whole supply chain, but it could start in the middle as well. It could start at the distributor. It could even start at the retailer. Our largest recall in 2019 from a customer standpoint went to more than 8,700 retailers across the country from their distributor supplier. And it took our distributor supplier 9 minutes and 2 seconds to do that work.
So just so we're following how Roger's business works, there's essentially 4 different layers of communication. And so he was saying the best case scenario is when the manufacturer knows there's a problem. So in this case, there's a baby toy that's wrong. The manufacturer would use Roger's system to notify the distributor, who then would notify the stores, and then his system can even go down to the consumer level. Then he said that's ideal, but sometimes the store will realize a problem and they can use his system to contact the distributor or contact the manufacturer, or it could start with the distributor who could contact stores or could contact manufacturers. So really his system brings all of these together, and it's whoever kind of initiates that initial contact that starts the process.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean the value is very clear in terms of what was their manual process versus an automated clear process with follow-ups and checkups and stuff. I guess still what's fuzzy for me as well is who's paying you? Like, is it, because you mentioned it could be the supplier, it could be the distributor, or it could be the actual like retail. Do all 3 cut you payments? Is there one main payment person?
The way the economics work today, whoever uses our service for notifying their supply chain partners of a recall is billed by us an event fee. So there's no subscription fee, there's no seat charge fee, there's just fee for service.
Just use case. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if a manufacturer notifies their 100 distributors, they would get an invoice from us. If 50 of those 100 distributors use our service to notify their 100 points of sale that they service, they would also get an invoice from us. This is interesting, if you can kind of think of a recall as moving product out of the supply chain, well, the dollars flow the same way. Because at the end of the chain, they want a credit for the product that they couldn't sell.
Yeah.
The people who get a credit for the product they couldn't sell want credit from the manufacturer. The manufacturer packages up all of these expenses and submits an insurance claim.
Got it.
So the dollars flow just like the product flows.
Got it.
Okay, so remember earlier we said in B2B services, it's all about the money. It's how much you can save another business or how much more money you can bring in. Well, in this case, Roger's helping them get their money back because let's say there was a recall of yogurt. Well, all the grocery stores are going to want a refund. And so his service will track, hey, we took off 100 jars of yogurt. So we need a refund for 100. Well, that request will then go to the distributor. And the distributor will then pay a refund because he has to take his product back. And so now this distributor is on the hook for 100 jars of yogurt. So he'll go back to the manufacturer and say, hey, there was a recall. I need a refund for 100 jars of yogurt, which they will give him. So he gets paid. And then as long as it's tracked correctly, then the manufacturer will be able to file an insurance claim. And so not only is Roger really handling the communication, but he's creating this paper trail to make the refund process and also the insurance claim as easy as possible. But more importantly, that just means that the right money is getting back to the right people.
So, and then to your point before, manufacturers would still be incentivized, even though they're going to be billed for it, they'll be incentivized to start the communication just to save brand and also have, protect themselves from liability issues.
That's right. And there's data correlations between the faster you do a recall, the less it costs you. The less it costs you in terms of brand evaluation, the less it costs you in terms of liability exposure, and the less it costs you in terms of actually processing it. Because the faster you process it, the less distributed your product is. If it takes you 9 minutes to get a recall out, your product isn't going to get as far down the supply chain as if it takes you 3 days.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So how did you avoid the whole chicken and the egg problem? Because it sounds like I'm just thinking like the early days, if you told a manufacturer, hey, we'll communicate to all your, let's just use grocery stores again. We'll communicate this to all your grocery stores. That means you'd have to have all the grocery stores and their, key contacts on your platform. Otherwise you have no one to like communicate with. So how do you balance that so that there's like value from day one?
Good question, Ryan. There was a service kind of touting themselves as the industry standard who followed your model, and they no longer exist because it was too difficult to fight this chicken and egg battle. We targeted as our ideal customer the person in the middle, because the person in the middle, the distributor, doesn't have one recall every 3 or 4 years like a manufacturer does. They have a recall every week because they aren't selling one manufacturer's product, they're selling 10,000 manufacturers' products. And so across those 10,000 manufacturers, one of them has a recall this week. Now, it might not be this week, but on average, One week there's, I can tell you from personal experience, Friday afternoons, you might get 6 recalls. Monday through Thursday, you didn't get any. Friday afternoon, you get 6. But on average, a distributor is doing recalls regularly. There are frequent user customers.
So remember what we talked about before, where you want to find your clients that have high pains and high frequency. And so Roger was talking about how a manufacturer does have high pains. So they're up here, but the frequency is pretty low, meaning that, maybe every once in a while a manufacturer has a recall, but a distributor is working with thousands of these manufacturers. And so while a manufacturer might have one recall every, let's call it 5 to 10 years, if I'm working with 10,000 manufacturers, that means that I'm having recalls all the time. And a distributor, remember, he needs his money back because he's going to issue a refund to the manufacturer. And so to Roger's point, distributor is going to be doing that refund process several times a week if they're dealing with a lot of manufacturers. So he's really found that sweet spot of someone that has high pains, you're dealing with money, and they need to move quickly and communicate to stores, but it's happening at a high enough frequency.
And the distributor passes the cost of our service along with product credits to their manufacturer supplier. And so they get a net benefit from our service at no net cost.
Got it.
So that's where we focused. We grew our business there, double-digit growth for 6 years running or so.
Yeah.
And now we're amplifying through our strategic partners up to the manufacturer sector. So we aren't doing a pivot, we're doing an and.
That makes sense. You've solidified one customer segment. You think there's opportunity for another customer segment.
Right. That's exactly right. And the second customer segment actually is going to amplify our message to the first customer segment. So we'll see business growth in both. Yeah,
it makes sense because all of a sudden a new manufacturer, sends a new message to a new distributor who thinks, oh, I might like this service.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. When you did the initial distributors, if you signed up your first distributor, did they give you a list of here's all the grocery stores we deal with and their contact numbers, or how do you get around that?
Well, that's a great question, Ryan. What I learned at Albertsons, so I led their food safety and quality function for 15 years, and we did 250 recalls a year.
Yeah.
And I learned that the customer list is different for every recall. We did 10 to 20%, so 25 to 50 recalls a year went to every store that we serviced.
Yeah.
The other 200 or 225 went to a separate set, just a subset of those stores.
Yeah.
So our system requires a customer list from our client for every recall. So our client, for every recall, uploads a customer list.
Got it.
Here are the customers for this recall.
So previously I asked Roger about the chicken and the egg problem because I was confused that, if a distributor wanted to use Roger's platform to contact stores and manufacturers, I was under the assumption that Roger would need to have all the stores and the contact info and all the manufacturers. But in fact, that's part of the actual process of issuing the recall. So the distributor will not only hit a button, but that button will have a contact list to all the stores that need to be contacted and to the single manufacturer. So this is kind of double-sided because it takes the burden off of Roger because he doesn't have to maintain a database with all the contact information. It reduces all the liability, but it also puts a higher burden on the distributor because every time they want to use Roger's tool, they have to have this mechanism that has all of the contact information in a single spot.
And this was a bit of liability protection for us.
Yeah.
We don't maintain a user list for our clients.
Yeah.
Because if we're maintaining the list and it's not current, then we're liable for not getting the information right.
Yeah. So it's on that. Okay. That totally makes sense. So
that's right.
Day one, you sign someone up. It's not like you're asking for a database of users and then storing that.
That's right.
They just indicate as part of the notification process, here's who needs to be notified.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. It takes the burden off of you, but also to your point, it solidifies that you're contacting the right people.
The burden that it places on us is we have to help them get their contact information because until they have their contact information centralized, they can't use our service.
Okay, so we'll put a pause here just to emphasize what Roger says. If the distributor or the stores or whoever it might be, let's just use the distributor for this example. If they don't have all their information centralized, then they can't even use his tool. So that means Roger has the hurdle of making sure before a crisis happens that there's going to be a list that they can easily upload because you don't want to train someone at the time of a crisis of a recall.
And there is a law in place, the Bioterrorism Act of 2001, that requires that people have contact information, emails, phones, faxes, text message numbers for both their customers and their suppliers. And so we thought it was going to be easy because there's a law in place, right?
Yeah.
But compliance with the law is pretty loose, and there's nobody really inspecting or enforcing that law in that way. So it's been a hurdle for us.
Yeah. Is that just part of your onboarding process? Like before there's a crisis,
yes,
you sign them up and then say, okay, let's get you ready. So when this does happen, it's pretty seamless.
That is exactly what we do.
Do you charge for that onboarding process?
We do.
Okay. Yeah. That seems pretty laborious.
And well, we charge for the onboarding process. And what we're doing now is to the different level of the different customer type, the infrequent users as opposed to the frequent users, is we're building an automated process so that our system actually guides them every step of the way. So just like our system takes the manual out of doing a recall, well, now our system is going to take the manual on us out of setup.
And that's in process, correct? That's what we're working on now?
That's in process for launch this fall.
Yeah, okay.
It's really exciting service.
Okay, so what's happening with Roger actually happens a lot with startups in that Roger is solving a pain, but in doing so is actually creating a new pain. So Roger's handling all of the recall process, makes that super easy. But before you can actually use his tool, he needs a centralized list. And most of these distributors or manufacturers, they don't have lists readily available that outlines all the stores that need to be contacted and manufacturers. So there's a lot of headache up front. He can get away with that with distributors because they're going to be using his product so much. Remember, it's high paying, but it's also going to be high volume, meaning that they're going to use his service anywhere from 1 to 5 times a week. Whereas a manufacturer, he said, they're only going to use him maybe once every 3 to 5 years. And so he's got a tougher sell that says, hey, go through all this pain up front. Let's go ahead and get your list going. And oh, by the way, I'm going to charge you for it just for this one event that's going to happen every 3 to 5 years. He's trying to reduce his newly created pain by automating the process. And that's why he emphasized that this is for the kind of the less frequent users. That way they don't have to spend the time of getting the system up. It's just kind of automated, and then it's ready to go, and the value's there when they need to use it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. That seems like that'd be your biggest pain point of having, immediate initial value.
It's our biggest pain point between signature and use.
Yeah.
So you have a sales
that's
cycle.
true, because you're not getting paid on the signature.
Right.
Yeah, because you said it's on the use. So yeah, the easier you make it to use it, the more they'll most likely use it. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So the way we were is, we had a hurdle in the sales cycle to get over. We're disruptive. We're a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
And then we had another hurdle to get over from signature to use. And so we're doing a lot of things to lower the barrier on both of those processes.
And do you, your pricing model, I know you said you charge on usage. Is it just the number of notifications that get sent out? Like, do you have a sliding price scale based on like how big the notification was? Or is it just a flat, you used our service, here's the fee?
It is very flat.
Okay.
And the variable is the number of customers in an event.
When you say customers, like end clients who receive the message?
Customers who our client is notifying.
Got it. Yep.
So, and where we do have a difference in price point, a B2B notification, because it enables response, documentation, editing of the database, et cetera.
Yeah.
Is a different price point than a B2C notification.
Oh, so you do have B2C capabilities?
We do.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
That would be like if Graco had a bad stroller, and they had a customer list because people had registered or whatnot, they could pass that information to you, and you would contact the consumer directly as well on their behalf.
That's exactly correct. And one of the pivots that we're beginning to see and anticipating from the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of manufacturers are developing direct-to-consumer sales processes.
Yeah.
Because consumers are a little bit less ready to go in and touch something before they buy it.
Yeah.
And so this B2C component that actually validates the consumer was notified, documents that they received that notification, acknowledge that notification, is going to be a growing service that we can provide.
Roger's also describing something very common when a company essentially transitions from a startup into a more established company. So startups are typically trying to find that key customer, that golden customer. And in this case, for Roger, it was distributors for reasons that we've already discussed. But now that he's kind of got a solidified business around the distributor and his technology touches all these pieces, this is where he's starting to expand. So we already talked about he's going after manufacturers by creating an automated process so they're more likely to buy. He's also seen, because of COVID-19, but just general practices, that he's seen a growing trend that manufacturers skip these two and go straight to the consumer. And so we see that with mattress companies. We see that with shavers. There's just a lot of stuff now that people can order directly from the manufacturer. And so he sees an angle where he can have more customer communication directly, which is another reason that manufacturers would want his product. So not only is he trying to make it easier, but there's another customer segment, which is the manufacturer direct to consumer.
Yeah.
And also more working remotely, because our service is in the cloud and isn't something that has to be built locally, is going to be a huge lift as well.
That makes sense. Let's wrap up with just, I understand where you were saying the distributors were kind of like your first initial, or like still like your core group. Of the distributors, are there markets that find you most valuable? Like, you mentioned like at the beginning, there's nuclear, there's food, there's this, there's that. Is there one market that's been like, of your distributors that has like loved your product more than others for XYZ reason?
Well, yeah, great question. Food is by far the most sensitive category because it's in the news and people use it, consume it all the time. Second to food is pharmaceutical, because it also is a human consumable in a way, or a human injectable.
Sure.
And then next, when I explain it, it won't be surprising, but at first you're going to go, huh? Pets.
You did.
Pet.
You got me there. I'm like, pets.
Yeah. Pet treats and pet products have been recalled regularly.
Yeah.
And
it's consumable again. You're affecting the health of someone.
And yeah, well, and what you just said kind of crystallizes why it's so important. You said someone.
Yeah.
A lot of people think of their pets as their someones.
Yeah.
And their pets are really important to them. And so pet has been another vertical that has been really benefited by our service.
So to this point, Roger's really defined his customer segments of a manufacturer, distributors, stores, etc. But towards the end, we're truly trying to define like, well, there's a bunch of manufacturers and there's a bunch of stores. Which ones are most likely to use your product? And he says anybody who essentially digests the product. So if they're eating it, if it goes in their body, whether it's human or whether it's pets and animals, etc., digestion is the most, because it's most sensitive. It could probably do the most harm. And so this is his target client. Once again, he can expand out, but it's good to know the people that have the most pain. And in this case, it's people that are digesting the product.
Automotive has been a lot slower. People are really ready to say how broken the automotive recall process is.
Yeah.
But the automotive sector has been really reluctant to do anything different. Electronics is a sector, apparel is a sector. You'd be surprised that hooded sweatshirts are recalled about once a year for the last 10 years because they're constructed to not meet code with strangulation risks.
Yeah.
You would think after a while they'd get it, but somebody new makes a new sweatshirt and it doesn't conform. So So there's lots of recall opportunity. Actually, B2B, we estimate there are between 40 and 80 million B2B recall processes managed every year around the world.
Yeah. Well, Roger, it sounds like you have good value to be part of that process. Like it's pretty clear the value that you give, whether it's quick notifications or saving someone from liability or further legal causes, and also helping them on their financial side. So thank you so much for kind of clarifying your value proposition. We thank you for your time.
You're right. We work hard. We wake up every day and all we do is recalls. We're the only company in the world that does it, but that's what we do and we're passionate about it. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Roger.
Okay, so let's finish this segment by reviewing the value proposition canvas. And specifically, we're going to focus on the distributor because that's Roger's main client they started with and probably has the most initial value. And so Roger knows that 1 to 5 times per week, a distributor might have a recall because they could be dealing with thousands of different manufacturers. And so the distributor is in charge of contacting each store to get the recall process, tracking the recall to make sure that product is removed, And then they have to start the refund process with the manufacturer so that all parties get their money back. The biggest pain points is that it's really high liability. If they don't move quick, they could be sued, or just the problems get worse, brand liability, etc. And then they also can lose a lot of money, right? Recalls have to affect people on the financial side. Some of the positives that they'd be looking for, at least, the perks would be reduce manual errors and speed up this process, because we know this is very slow, especially on a manual way. So then you jump to the services he's offering. So he's automating all this. He's automating the ability to contact people. He's automating the ability to track to make sure that the recall actually worked. And then he's automating the refund process so that people get their money back. And so he's reducing a lot, if not completely eliminating human errors, because everything's automated and almost like a task manager. And it's extremely fast, right? He gave the example of contacting 8,000 stores in a few hours. So what this does is it reduces the liability. Obviously, with the recall, there's always going to be some liability. But to Roger's point, if you move quickly, you're lessening that liability. So you're lowering that. That's a huge pain point that they're solving. It is important to note that they're not completely eliminating it, but they are lowering it. They're making the process of getting money back very easy. Remember, they lose money here. That's one of their biggest pain points. They're afraid of losing money. He helps with that process back. And then there's also, when it comes to B2B, there's a saving money component. Remember, by the fact that he's automating all this and he's reducing all the manual phone calls, he's saving people a bunch of money especially if they're doing it 1 to 5 times per week. That's a lot of phone calls, a lot of tracking down. So he's saving those man hours, which then equate to salary savings or hourly savings. So that's Roger's value proposition canvas. Thanks for listening. While you're waiting for the next episode, feel free to contact us or follow us on social media.